Hello there, my dreamy travelers. Tonight, beneath the quiet shimmer of moonlight, we'll wander into a mirror world. The same rain-soaked halls of forks, the same forbidden love, but reflected through different eyes. A story where choices made lead to different endings, where life and death hang in the balance, and where transformation comes not as a gift, but as necessity. I'm pouring my heart into these videos, and sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. And then one of you leaves the sweetest comment, and it reminds me why I'm doing this. But I'm not giving up. If you want to support a small creator who's trying to make something beautiful, please consider subscribing. Thank you. So, close your eyes. Breathe in the cool night air, and let this reimagined tale carry you into a world where the same story becomes something new, and dreams never end. On October 6th, 2015, Stephen E. Meyer released a book that surprised the world. It was Twilight's 10th anniversary. A decade since the original novel had transformed young adult literature and sparked a cultural phenomenon that showed no signs of fading. Fans expected perhaps a special edition, maybe some bonus content or behind-the-scenes material about the creation of Bella and Edward's love story. What they got instead was something far more unexpected. Life and Death. Twilight Reimagined. A complete retelling of the original Twilight story with one fundamental change that rippled through every page, every scene, every moment of the familiar narrative. The genders were swapped. Bella Swan became Beau Swan. Edward Cullen became Edith Cullen. And with those changes came a reimagining that would challenge every assumption readers had made about the story they thought they knew so well. Meyer's intent was clear from her introduction to the novel. She had spent a decade defending Twilight against critics who claimed Bella was too passive, too willing to sacrifice everything for a boy, too much the damsel in distress, waiting for her vampire prince to save her. The criticisms had been relentless, focusing on gender dynamics, on what the story supposedly said about young women and their choices, on whether Bella was a positive role model or a problematic one. So Meyer posed a question. What if the story remained exactly the same, but the genders were different? Would Beau be criticized for the same choices Bella made? Would a male protagonist waiting for rescue be seen as weak? Would a female vampire protecting her male human lover be viewed as controlling or merely devoted? The experiment was designed to reveal the double standards lurking beneath the surface of literary criticism, to expose how gender colors the way we read and interpret character choices. The transformation was comprehensive and deliberate. Bella Swan, the 17-year-old girl who moved from Phoenix to Forks, became Beau Swan, the 17-year-old boy making the same journey Edward Cullen, the impossibly beautiful vampire who had lived for over a century, became Edith Cullen, equally beautiful, equally ancient, equally dangerous. Every major character received this treatment. Their names changed to maintain the same initials while shifting gender. Carlisle Cullen, the compassionate patriarch and gifted doctor, became Kareen Cullen, a woman who had practiced medicine for centuries. Esme Cullen, the gentle mother figure, became Ernest Cullen, a kind father with a gift for restoration and creation. Alice Cullen, the pixie-like precognitive vampire, became Archie Cullen, still small and energetic, still seeing futures that shifted with every decision. Jasper Cullen, the empath struggling with his thirst, became Jessamine Cullen, carrying the same scars from her violent past. Rosalie and Emmett underwent perhaps the most interesting transformation. Rosalie became Royal, a stunningly beautiful male vampire bitter about the human life stolen from him, still vain and resentful, but now processing those emotions through a different lens. Emmett became Eleanor, a powerful female vampire with a love for physical challenges and a boisterous personality that defied traditional feminine stereotypes. The supporting cast followed suit. Jacob Black became Julie Black, the Quileute friend who would eventually reveal her own supernatural nature. Mike Newton became Michaela Newton, the overly friendly classmate with an obvious crush. Jessica Stanley became Jeremy Stanley, the gossip who befriended Beau early on. Every character, every name, every relationship was flipped while maintaining the essential dynamics that had made the original story compelling. But Life and Death was more than a simple find and replace exercise with names and pronouns. Maya made subtle adjustments throughout to account for how gender affects experience and expectation. Beau's narrative voice, while similar to Bella's in many ways, carried different assumptions. Where Bella had felt responsible for her mother's happiness and played the caretaker role, Beau felt responsible for not being a burden, for proving he could handle things on his own. The internal monologue shifted to reflect how young men process emotion and vulnerability differently than young women. Not because of any inherent difference in capacity for feeling, but because of societal conditioning about what boys and girls are supposed to express. Edith Cullen emerged as perhaps the most fascinating reimagining, where Edward had been protective to the point of controlling, making decisions for Bella's safety without her input. Edith displayed the same protective instincts, but had to navigate different social expectations. A female vampire protecting a male human lover operated in a different cultural context. Edith couldn't throw Beau over her shoulder and carry him away from danger without that action reading as more jarring, more obviously a violation of his agency. The power dynamics remained similar, but the optics shifted, revealing how gender influences our perception of who gets to be the protector and who needs protecting. The setting remained identical. Forks, Washington, with its perpetual rain and cloud cover perfect for vampires who sparkled in sunlight. The high school with its small town dynamics where everyone knew everyone. The Swan House where Beau would live with his father Charlie, a police chief more comfortable with silence than conversation. The Cullen house in the woods, beautiful and isolating, filled with vampires trying to live as humans while fighting their nature every moment. The mythology stayed the same as well. Vampires were created through venom that rewrote human biology at the cellular level, transforming mortals into immortal predators. They possess superhuman strength, speed, and senses. They didn't sleep, didn't age, didn't change once transformation was complete. Sunlight didn't burn them, but made their skin sparkle like diamonds, revealing their inhuman nature. They needed blood to survive, with human blood providing the most sustenance, but animal blood offering an alternative for those willing to fight their instincts. The Cullen family's vegetarian lifestyle remained their defining characteristic. Karine had chosen this path centuries ago, deciding that immortality didn't have to mean surrendering humanity, that they could resist their predatory nature and live without killing. She'd built a family of like-minded vampires, each one choosing to fight their thirst, to abstain from human blood, to exist as peacefully as possible among the humans they no longer were. The Volturi still ruled from Italy, ancient vampire royalty who enforced the few laws that governed their kind. Aro, Caius, and Marcus remained male. Their wives remained female, because life and death only gender-swapped the Fork's characters, leaving the wider vampire world unchanged. This created interesting dynamics when considering how Edith and her family would eventually have to answer to male authority figures about their choice to let a human know their secrets. The themes remained universal: the tension between mortality and immortality, between the finite beauty of human life and the eternal existence of vampires. The question of whether love justified risk, whether connection was worth the danger it brought. The exploration of choice and agency, of who get to decide their own fate and who has those decisions made for them. The examination of what it means to be human, whether humanity is defined by biology or by the choices we make. Maya was proving a point with this reimagining, that the story worked regardless of gender, that Beau's choices were the same as Bella's choices, driven by love and loyalty and the desire to be with someone despite impossible obstacles, that Edith's protective instincts were the same as Edward's, rooted in love mixed with the very real danger she posed to the person she cared about most, that the criticism aimed at Bella and Edward's relationship often had less to do with the actual dynamics and more to do with gendered expectations about how young women and young men should behave in romantic relationships. But Life and Death was also an opportunity for Maya to address something that had bothered her about Twilight. The original story had been her first novel, written quickly, published with minimal revision compared to what she'd learned in the years since. There were things she would have done differently, choices she would have refined, moments she would have strengthened or softened with the benefit of experience. Life and Death gave her that chance. The plot followed the same trajectory as Twilight, hitting the same major beats, but the execution showed a more mature writer at work. The pacing was slightly different, the descriptions more polished, the dialogue more natural. Small details were adjusted, unnecessary scenes trimmed, character motivations clarified in ways that made the story flow more smoothly. And then there was the ending. The ending that would diverge dramatically from Twilight's conclusion, that would take the story in a direction Maya had considered for the original, but ultimately hadn't pursued. The ending that would transform Life and Death from a simple gender swap exercise into something that asked different questions about choice, agency, and transformation. But that ending waited in the future, still still hours and hundreds of pages away from where the story began. For now, there was only Beau Swan, arriving in Fawkes with low expectations and no idea that his life was about to change in ways both wonderful and terrible. There was only the first day of school, the first glimpse of the Cullen family in the cafeteria, the first moment when Edith Cullen's golden eyes would meet his across a crowded biology classroom. The mirror was set, the reflection was ready, and the familiar story was about to unfold, with just enough difference to make readers question everything they thought they understood about the tale they knew by heart. Beau Swan arrived in Fawkes, Washington on a grey January morning when the rain fell steadily and the sky hung low enough to feel oppressive. He'd made this drive before, visiting his father Charlie during summers when he was younger, but those visits had always been temporary. This time felt different. This time felt permanent in ways that made his chest tight, with a mixture of resignation and guilt. He was 17 years old, a junior in high school, and he was moving from Phoenix, Arizona, to the rainiest town in the continental United States because his mother needed him to. Not because Renee had asked him to leave, not because she'd made him feel unwelcome, but because Beau had recognized the truth that his mother was too kind to say aloud. She'd remarried, had found happiness with Phil Dwyer, a minor league baseball player whose career required constant travel. And Renee wanted to travel with her new husband, wanted to follow him to spring training and road games and all the small town ballparks where Phil chased his dream of making it to the majors. But she couldn't do that with Beau anchoring her to Phoenix, requiring stability and routine and all the things a high school student needed. Renee would never have admitted it, would have insisted that Beau came first, that she'd stay in Phoenix forever if that's what he needed, which was exactly why Beau had made the decision for her, had announced that he wanted to spend some time with Charlie, wanted to experience small town life, wanted to give Fawkes a real chance. The lie had been transparent to both of them, but Renee had been too relieved to push back too hard. And Beau had been too determined to be self-sufficient, to not be the burden that required his mother to sacrifice her happiness to prove he could handle things on his own. So here he was, pulling up to Charlie's small 2-story house on the edge of town. The same house he'd visited during those childhood summers, but never lived in full time. Charlie came out to greet him, awkward and quiet as always, their conversation stilted and full of the long silences that characterized their relationship. Charlie showed him to his room upstairs, the same room he'd always used during visits, and Beau unpacked his limited belongings while trying not to think about the sunny Phoenix bedroom he'd left behind. The truck was a surprise. Charlie had bought it from Billy Black, an old friend who lived on the Quileute reservation in La Push. It was a 1953 Chevy, ancient and loud and completely lacking in any modern amenities, but it ran, and it was Beau's, and he felt an unexpected surge of affection for the monstrosity. At least he'd have transportation, independence, the ability to come and go without relying on Charlie for rides. That night, Beau lay in bed listening to unfamiliar sounds. Rain against the window, constant and rhythmic. Wind in the trees surrounding the house. The settling creaks of old wood and aging foundation. He'd grown up with air conditioning units humming and distant traffic noise and the dry heat of the desert. This was different. This was wet and cold and alien, and Bo wasn't sure he'd ever adjust to it. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Bo, dressed carefully in jeans and a button-down shirt, trying to look presentable without looking like he was trying too hard. First days were always awkward, always full of stares and questions and the exhausting performance of being new. He drove the truck to Forks High School, a collection of matching brick buildings that looked more like a compound than a campus, and parked in the student lot among significantly newer vehicles. The office ladies were kind and efficiently helpful, providing him with his schedule and a map of the campus, and entirely too much sympathy about being the new kid. Bo accepted it all with quiet thanks and headed to his first class, already feeling the weight of attention that came with being a new student in a school where everyone had known each other since kindergarten. The morning passed in the blur of introductions and curious stares. His classmates were friendly enough, particularly a boy named Jeremy Stanley, who attached himself to Bo with enthusiastic determination, narrating the school's social hierarchy and pointing out people Bo should know. There was Michaela Newton, who smiled too brightly and stood too close, clearly interested in a way that made Bo uncomfortable. There was Alan Webber, quiet and kind, who welcomed Bo without the aggressive friendliness others displayed. There were others whose names blurred together, all of them curious about the new student, all of them trying to figure out where he fit. And then there was lunch. Bo followed Jeremy into the cafeteria, a large room filled with round tables and the noise of 300 teenagers talking at once. Jeremy was still providing commentary, pointing out various cliques and social groups, when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Oh," Jeremy said, his voice shifting to something between awe and nervousness. "Those are the Cullens and the Hales. They live together with Dr. Cullen and her husband. They're all like adopted or fostered or whatever. But don't bother trying to talk to them. They keep to themselves. It's like weird how beautiful they all are. It's not normal." Bo followed Jeremy's gaze to a table in the corner of the cafeteria where 5 students sat together, separate from everyone else. And Jeremy was right. They were beautiful in a way that didn't seem possible, in a way that made Bo's breath catch despite himself. There were 2 girls and 3 boys, though calling them boys and girls seemed inadequate. They looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, perfect and polished and utterly alien among the normal teenagers surrounding them. One of the girls was tall and blonde, statuesque and intimidating even sitting down. The other girl was small and dark-haired, energetic in her movements, bouncing slightly in her seat as she talked. One of the boys was massive, broad-shouldered and muscular in ways that suggested serious time in a gym. Another was lean and honey blonde, beautiful in an almost painful way. And the third was a girl who made Bo forget to breathe. She was smaller than the blonde girl, but still graceful, with a waterfall of bronze-colored hair that fell in soft waves around a face so perfect it seemed carved rather than born. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her features were delicate and precise. But it was her eyes that caught Bo's attention, held it, refused to let go. They were gold, not brown or hazel, but actual gold, a color that shouldn't exist in human eyes. She was looking directly at him. Bo felt the impact of her gaze like a physical thing, like standing too close to a fire. She was staring at him with an intense intensity that made no sense, her golden eyes locked on his face, her expression difficult to read, not friendly, not welcoming, something closer to horror or fury or desperate hunger. "That's Edith Cullen," Jeremy said, following Beau's gaze. "The redhead. She's like ridiculously smart and completely unapproachable. None of them really talk to anyone outside their family. Royal and Eleanor are like a couple, which is weird since they live together, but whatever. And Archie is dating Jessamine, the blonde girl. But Edith doesn't date anyone. Trust me, people have tried. She's not interested." Beau barely heard Jeremy's words. He was still caught in Edith's stare, still feeling the weight of whatever emotion was burning behind those impossible gold eyes. Then she looked away abruptly, turning to speak to the small dark-haired boy beside her, and Beau felt like he could breathe again. The rest of lunch passed in a haze. Beau tried to focus on Jeremy's chatter, tried to eat the cafeteria food he'd purchased, tried to act normal, but his attention kept drifting back to that corner table, to the girl with the bronze hair, who'd looked at him like he was either the best or worst thing she'd ever seen. Biology was his last class of the day. Beau entered the classroom and handed his slip to Mr. Varner, a balding man who seemed perpetually distracted. Mr. Varner scanned the room for an empty seat, and Beau's stomach dropped when he saw where the teacher was looking. There was an empty chair at a black-topped lab table in the middle of the room, and sitting beside that empty chair, her bronze hair unmistakable, was Edith Cullen. "There's a seat next to Miss Cullen," Mr. Varner said, pointing unnecessarily. Beau walked toward the table with a sense of inevitability, hyper-aware of every step, every breath. Edith didn't look up as he approached, her attention focused on the notebook in front of her with unnatural intensity. Beau slid into the seat beside her and immediately understood that something was very wrong. Edith had gone rigid. Her entire body was tense, her hands gripping the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles showed white. She'd angled herself away from him as far as the chair allowed, her face turned toward the windows, and she wasn't breathing. Beau was certain of that somehow, certain that she was holding her breath, refusing to inhale. The reaction stung more than it should have. Beau knew he was awkward, knew he wasn't particularly impressive or interesting, but he'd never had someone react to his mere presence with such obvious revulsion. He tried to focus on Mr. Varner's lecture about cellular anatomy, tried to ignore the girl beside him, who was acting like he carried some contagious disease. The class period was torture. Edith never relaxed, never breathed normally, never acknowledged Beau's existence beyond the rigid tension of her body. When Mr. Varner had them work on identifying cell structures on prepared slides, Beau attempted to share the microscope, attempted to be a functional lab partner. But Edith pulled the microscope toward herself without a word, examined the slide with quick efficiency, and pushed it back toward Beau without making eye contact. When the bell finally rang, Edith was out of her seat and through the door before Beau had even closed his textbook. He watched her flee, confused and hurt, and increasingly certain that he'd done something wrong without knowing what. The next day, Edith wasn't in school, or the day after that, or the rest of the week. Her chair in biology remained empty, and Beau found himself both relieved and disappointed by her absence. Relieved because her obvious disgust had been painful to endure. disappointed because despite that disgust, despite the tension and awkwardness, he wanted to see her again. Wanted to understand what he'd done to provoke such a reaction. Wanted to hear her voice, which he realized he'd never actually heard. Michaela and Jeremy filled the absence with their own theories. Maybe Edith was sick, though the Cullens never seemed to get sick. Maybe there was a family emergency, though none of the other Cullens had missed school. Maybe she just didn't feel like coming, because the Cullens were weird like that, appearing and disappearing without explanation. Bo didn't share his own theory, which was that Edith Cullen had taken one look at him and decided she'd rather skip school entirely than sit beside him. It was humiliating and confusing and completely inexplicable. He was used to being overlooked, used to fading into the background. He wasn't used to provoking such an intense negative reaction. When Monday of the second week arrived and Edith still wasn't in school, Bo had almost convinced himself she'd transferred, that he'd somehow driven her away from Forks High School through the sheer force of his awkward presence. So when he walked into biology on Tuesday and saw her sitting at their shared lab table, her bronze hair catching the fluorescent light, he stopped so abruptly that the student behind him nearly ran into his back. Edith looked different. Not in any way Bo could specifically identify, but different nonetheless. The tension that had characterized her posture before was gone, replaced by something that seemed almost like curiosity. And when Bo slid into his seat beside her, she didn't recoil, didn't hold her breath, didn't act like he was toxic. Instead, she turned to look at him directly, those gold eyes meeting his, and she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and cautious, but it transformed her already perfect face into something that made Bo's heart skip several beats. "Hello," Edith said, her voice like music, like something beautiful and impossible. "I'm Editha Cullen. I don't think we've been properly introduced. You're Bo Swan." It wasn't a question. She knew his name, though Bo couldn't remember anyone saying it in her presence. But he was too surprised by the smile, too caught off guard by the friendly tone, to question how she knew. "Yeah," Bo managed. "Hi, nice to meet you." The words were inadequate, painfully normal, but Edith's smile widened slightly, and Bo felt like he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. And just like that, everything changed. The transformation in Edith's behavior was as complete as it was inexplicable. Where before she'd recoiled from Bo's presence, now she seemed almost drawn to it. She spoke to him during biology, asked him questions about Phoenix and his mother and his adjustment to Forks. She was curious in ways that felt both flattering and slightly intense, her golden eyes never leaving his face when he answered, her attention absolute and unwavering. Bo found himself telling her things he hadn't planned to share, about Renee's remarriage and his decision to move north, about missing the sun and the heat and the familiar landscape of the desert, about feeling perpetually damp in Forks, like the rain had seeped into his bones and would never fully dry out. Edith listened with an intensity that made each word feel important, like she was memorizing every detail of his mundane life. But when Bo tried to ask questions in return, tried to learn about Edith beyond the basics everyone already knew, she deflected with practiced ease. She was adopted, along with her siblings. Karine Cullen was a doctor at the hospital, brilliant and kind. Ernest was an architect and designer. They moved frequently for Kareen's work. They'd been in Forks for 2 years now. Beyond these facts, Edith revealed nothing personal, nothing real, and Beau felt the asymmetry of their conversations like an imbalance he couldn't correct. The weeks passed, winter sliding towards spring, though the rain never stopped. Beau settled into a routine at Forks High School, made friends with Jeremy and Alan and Michaela, played along with Michaela's obvious interest while trying not to encourage it. He helped Charlie cook dinner most nights, maintained the easy silence that characterized their relationship, watched baseball games on television that neither of them particularly cared about, but both pretended to enjoy, and he became increasingly obsessed with Edith Cullen. It wasn't just her impossible beauty, though that was certainly part of it. It was the contradictions that surrounded her, the way she moved with unconscious grace, never stumbling, never making awkward gestures, the way her skin was always cold when her hand accidentally brushed his while reaching for lab equipment, the way she never ate anything in the cafeteria, just sat with her family pushing food around her tray, the way her eyes change color, sometimes bright gold, sometimes darker, almost black, though that should have been impossible. And then there was the incident in the parking lot. Beau had been walking to his truck after school, his mind occupied with an upcoming essay for English class, when he heard Michaela shout his name. He looked up just in time to see Tyler Crowley's van sliding across the icy parking lot directly toward him, the driver's face panicked behind the windshield, the vehicle moving too fast to stop. Beau froze, his body refusing to respond, his mind calculating with perfect clarity that he was about to be crushed. The van was 10 feet away, then 5, then close enough that Beau could read the Soundgarden sticker on the bumper. And then Edith was there. She appeared beside him, impossibly fast, her small hand slamming into the van's side with enough force to stop its momentum completely. The metal crumpled under her palms, denting inward, and the van rocked to a halt inches from where Beau stood. Edith pulled him backward, out of danger, her cold hands gripping his jacket, and then she was standing between him and the van, her face intense and focused. "Are you okay?" she demanded, her voice sharp with something that might have been fear. "Beau, are you hurt?" Beau stared at her, his mind trying to process what had just happened. Edith had been across the parking lot. He'd seen her standing by her family's silver Volvo 4 cars away. There was no way she could have reached him in time. No way she could have stopped the van with her bare hands. No way any of this was physically possible. "How did you get here so fast?" Beau asked, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Edith's expression shuddered immediately, the concern vanishing behind a mask of careful neutrality. "I was standing right here," she said, the lie obvious and blatant. "You must have hit your head. You should sit down." But Beau knew what he'd seen, knew that she'd been across the parking lot, knew that she'd moved with impossible speed and stopped a moving vehicle with her hands, knew that something about Edith Cullen was fundamentally wrong, fundamentally other, fundamentally not human. The ambulance came. Tyler was loaded inside, his head bleeding from where he'd hit the steering wheel. The paramedics wanted to take Beau too, wanted to check him for concussion and shock. Edith stood nearby, her face composed, and when the paramedics asked what happened, she told the same lie with perfect conviction. She'd been standing next to Beau. She'd pushed him out of the way. The van had barely missed them both. Everyone believed her. Everyone except Bo, who'd seen the truth, who knew what had really happened, who couldn't stop staring at the dents in the van's side that matched exactly where Edith's palms had pressed. After that day, Edith avoided him again. Not with the rigid disgust of that first biology class, but with a careful distance that felt deliberate and strategic. She was polite when they had to interact, friendly even, but she never let conversations extend beyond what was necessary. She was protecting something, hiding something, and Bo became determined to figure out what. He researched obsessively, started with simple searches about the Cullens, about Corinne and her family, about where they'd lived before Forks. The information was sparse and vague. Corinne had worked at various hospitals across the country. The family moved frequently. Before Forks, they'd been in Alaska. Before that, New York. Before that, other places that shifted and changed depending on which source Bo consulted. Then Bo started researching something else. The cold skin, the changing eye color, the impossible strength and speed, the way Edith never seemed to eat, the way she and her family kept themselves separate from everyone else, isolated and beautiful and strange. The search terms got more specific, unusual, uncomfortable. But Bo followed the thread anyway, clicking links he knew he shouldn't click, reading websites that seemed ridiculous but contained details that matched too closely to what he'd observed. And then he found the old Quileute legends. They were buried in a website about Pacific Northwest tribal stories, presented as folklore and mythology rather than fact. Stories about the Cold Ones, about beautiful immortal beings who drank blood and lived forever, about creatures who made treaties with the Quileute tribe, promising to stay off their land, to hunt animals instead of humans, to maintain the fragile peace between their kind and the people who knew what they were. Vampires. The word felt ridiculous even thinking it. Vampires weren't real. They were fiction. Hollywood monsters. Things that existed in books and movies, but not in the actual world. Bo knew this with the rational part of his mind, the part that understood biology and physics and the fundamental rules of reality. But the irrational part, the part that had watched Edith stop a van with her bare hands, the part that had noticed all the small wrong details that didn't add up to anything human, that part whispered that maybe, impossibly, vampires were exactly what the Cullens were. The confrontation came in Port Angeles on a Saturday in late March. Bo had driven to the coastal town with Jeremy and Alan, ostensibly to help them find dresses for the upcoming dance, though Bo had no intention of attending. They'd spent hours in various shops, Bo providing opinions he didn't care about on dresses he couldn't distinguish between, until finally his friends had what they needed and Bo could excuse himself. He'd wanted to find a bookstore, wanted something to read that wasn't available in Forks's limited library. He'd wandered the streets of Port Angeles, gotten slightly lost, ended up in a part of town that felt less tourist-friendly and more industrial. And that's when he'd noticed them. 4 men following him. Not obviously, not threateningly at first, but following nonetheless. Bo quickened his pace, tried to navigate back toward the main streets, but somehow kept taking wrong turns, kept ending up in darker, emptier spaces. The men were closer now, spreading out across the street, cutting off escape routes, and Bo felt fear spike sharp and cold in his chest. He was alone. It was getting dark. No one knew where he was, and these men clearly didn't have good intentions. Then, headlights swept across the street, bright and sudden, and the silver Volvo screeched to a stop inches from where Bo stood. The passenger door flew open. "Get in," Edith said, her voice carrying a tone that expected immediate obedience. Bo dove into the car without hesitation. Edith was already moving, pulling away from the curb with enough acceleration to throw Bo back against the seat. She navigated the streets of Port Angeles with perfect precision, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her face set in an expression of barely controlled fury. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the road. "Did they touch you?" "I'm fine," Bo managed, his heart still racing. "How did you know where I was?" "I was in the area," Eddie said, the lie obvious again. "Lucky timing." "You weren't in the area," Bo said, finding his courage. "You were following me. You've been following me. How else would you have known I needed help?" Edith's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. She drove in silence for several blocks, then pulled into the parking lot of a small Italian restaurant. She turned off the engine and sat very still, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. "I owe you an explanation," she said finally. "For stalking me?" Bo asked. "For saving your life," Edith corrected. "Twice now, though I suppose the stalking deserves explanation too." She got out of the car and Bo followed, trailing her into the restaurant where they were seated at a corner booth. Edith ordered for both of them, food for Bo and nothing for herself, and then she folded her hands on the table and looked at him with those gold eyes that seemed to see too much. "Ask me," she said quietly, "whatever you want to know. I'll answer honestly, just this once." Bo took a breath. "What are you?" "You know what I am," Edith said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've already figured it out. I can see it in your eyes. You just need me to confirm it." "Vampire," Bo said, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Edith smiled, a small sad expression. "Yes, that's the word people use, though it doesn't quite capture what we are. We're not undead. We're not soulless. We're just changed, different. Predators pretending to be human." The food arrived, and Bo stared at it, his appetite gone. Edith watched him, waiting for his reaction, prepared for him to run or scream or do any of the rational things a person should do when confronted with the reality of monsters. But Bo didn't run. He stayed in his seat, processing this impossible information, and asked his next question. "Are you going to kill me?" "I've been trying very hard not to," Edith said honestly. The invitation came 3 days after the Port Angeles conversation. Edith had driven Bo home that night, had sat in Charlie's driveway talking until past midnight, explaining what she was and what her family had chosen to become. Vegetarian vampires, she'd called them with dark humor. Creatures who fought their nature every moment of every day, who survived on animal blood instead of human prey. Bo had listened with a strange calm, processing information that should have sent him running, but instead made everything about Edith suddenly make sense. The cold skin was marble flesh. The changing eyes reflected thirst and satiation. The impossible strength and speed were vampire abilities. The isolation was self-preservation, protection for the humans around them who smelled like food. And now, Edith wanted him to meet her family. "They want to know you," she'd said during lunch on Wednesday. her voice carrying an uncertainty that seemed foreign to her usual confidence. "They've heard about you constantly for weeks. Archie's been having visions of you at our house. I think it's inevitable at this point. But Bo, you need to understand what you'd be walking into. My family isn't human. We try to act human. We perform humanity very well. But in our own home, we don't maintain the pretense. You'll see us as we really are." "I want to see that," Bo had said, meaning it. "I want to know all of it." So Saturday afternoon found Bo driving his ancient truck through the forest outside Forks, following the increasingly narrow road that led to the Cullen house. Edith had offered to pick him up, but Bo had wanted his own transportation, wanted the option of leaving if things became too overwhelming or strange. The independence felt important, a small way of maintaining control in a situation where he had very little. The house emerged from the trees like something from a design magazine, all glass and pale wood, modern architecture that seemed to grow organically from the forest around it. It was beautiful in a way that felt deliberately inhuman, too perfect to be comfortable, too precisely constructed to feel like a home where people actually lived. Edith met him at the door before he could knock, her face anxious in a way Bo had never seen before. She cared what he thought of her family, he realized. Cared whether he could accept them, whether he would run when confronted with the reality of what they were. "They're trying very hard to seem harmless," Edith said quietly. "Please don't hold it against them. We're all a little nervous." She led him inside to a living room that was more beautiful than lived in, furnished with pieces that looked expensive and uncomfortable. The Cullen family was arranged throughout the space with careful casualness, and Bo felt their attention focus on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Corinne Cullen stood to greet him first, her hand extended in a gesture of normal human politeness. She was smaller than Bo expected, delicate and blonde and impossibly beautiful, her eyes a warm gold that suggested recent hunting. Her handshake was careful, controlled, her marble skin cold against Bo's palm. "Bo," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed genuine despite the impossibility of her existence. "We're so happy you're here. Edith has told us so much about you. I'm Corinne. Welcome to our home." Beside her stood Ernest Cullen, dark-haired and kind-faced, his smile reaching eyes that held centuries of gentleness. He didn't offer to shake hands, seemed to understand that too much physical contact might overwhelm, but his welcome was no less sincere. "Good to meet you, Bo," Ernest said. "I designed the house. If you'd like a tour later, I'd be happy to show you around." The others introduced themselves with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Archie bounded forward with energy that seemed barely contained in his small frame, his hand shooting out to shake Bo's before anyone could stop him. "I'm Archie," he said, his grin infectious. "I've been seeing you in my visions for weeks now. It's nice to finally meet you in person instead of just impossible futures." Beside him, Jessamine stood with careful distance, her posture suggesting someone ready to flee or fight depending on necessity. She was beautiful in a painful way, scars visible on her arms that Edith had explained came from vampire bites, evidence of battles Bo couldn't imagine. Her eyes were darker than the others, suggesting she struggled more with the vegetarian lifestyle. "Hello, Bo," Jessamine said, quietly, her voice carrying a southern accent that seemed out of place in the Pacific Northwest. "I'm going to stay over here if you don't mind. Your scent is difficult for me. It's nothing personal. Bo appreciated the honesty more than false friendliness would have meant. He nodded understanding, kept his distance, tried not to think about the fact that he apparently smelled like food to every vampire in the room. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen with unnecessary force, her massive frame making the furniture seem delicate. She had an energy about her that suggested barely controlled violence, but her smile was genuine and her greeting enthusiastic. "You're the human who's got Edith all twisted up," Eleanor said with obvious delight. "This is going to be fun. I like you already." That left Royal, who stood by the window with his arms crossed and his expression carefully neutral. He was almost painfully beautiful, blonde and statuesque, his face set in lines of disapproval that he wasn't bothering to hide. "Royal," he said shortly when Bo looked his way. No handshake offered, no welcome extended. Eddie tensed beside Bo, her hand moving unconsciously toward his arm in a protective gesture. "Royal has reservations about humans knowing what we are," she said, her voice carrying an edge of warning aimed at her brother. "He's concerned about the risks." "I'm concerned about a lot of things," Royal said, his golden eyes fixed on Bo with an intensity that felt hostile. "I'm concerned about the Volturi finding out we've exposed ourselves to a human. I'm concerned about this human deciding he can't keep our secret. I'm concerned about Edith's judgment being compromised by emotions she shouldn't be indulging. Should I continue?" "That's enough," Kareen said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. "Bo is our guest. We agreed to give him a chance. You agreed, Royal." Royal's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, just turned back to the window and stared out at the forest with rigid disapproval radiating from every line of his body. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel physical. Bo stood in the center of it, surrounded by vampires who were trying very hard to seem harmless, while simultaneously being the most dangerous things he'd ever encountered. He should have been terrified, should have been running for his truck, driving back to Charlie's house, putting as much distance between himself and these beautiful monsters as possible. Instead, he felt strangely calm. These were Edith's family, the people who'd chosen to resist their nature, who fought every day to be something other than killers. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also people, complicated and conflicted, and trying to find meaning in an existence that should have been nothing but predation and death. "Thank you for having me," Bo said, addressing the room generally, but focusing on Kareen. "I know this is complicated. I know I'm making things difficult just by knowing about you, but I appreciate you letting me be here, letting me understand what Edith's life is actually like." Kareen's expression softened into something that looked almost maternal. "You're important to Edith," she said simply. "That makes you important to us. We're a family, Bo. We protect what matters to our own, and you matter to Edith more than anything has mattered to her in a very long time." Edith looked away, color that shouldn't be possible flooding her marble cheeks. Bo wondered how vampire biology allowed for blushing, decided it was probably something to do with venom instead of blood, and filed the question away for later. Archie clapped his hands together with sudden energy. "Okay, enough heavy conversation. Bo, you want to see something cool? Edith plays piano. She composed something for you. She won't admit it, but I've seen her playing it in my visions and it's really good." "Archie," Edith said, her voice carrying a warning. What? He should know. You've been working on it for weeks. It's romantic. He'll love it. Archie turned to Bo with a conspirator's grin. She calls it Bo's lullaby. How cute is that? Edith looked like she wanted to sing through the floor, an expression Bo had never seen on her usually composed face. But she also looked hopeful, like she wanted him to ask to hear it, wanted to share this piece of herself despite her embarrassment. I'd like to hear it, Bo said quietly. Edith led him to a grand piano positioned by the glass wall overlooking the forest. She sat with unconscious grace, her fingers settling on the keys with familiar comfort. Then she began to play, and Bo forgot to breathe. The music was beautiful beyond anything Bo had heard before, complex and layered and full of emotion that Edith rarely let show in words. It was longing and fear and hope and love all woven together, a confession in melody that said everything she struggled to express directly. When the last notes faded, Bo found his voice with difficulty. That was incredible. It's how I hear you, Edith said softly, still looking at the piano keys rather than at him. How you sound in my mind when I think about you, which is constantly, in case you were wondering. The rest of the afternoon passed in cautious conversation and careful observation. Ernest showed Bo around the house, pointing out design features and explaining his architectural philosophy. Eleanor challenged Bo to an arm wrestling match that everyone knew he'd lose, but that was surprisingly fun anyway. Archie talked about his visions, how they worked, and what he could and couldn't see, mentioning casually that Bo appeared in a lot of his possible futures. Jessamine kept her distance but participated in conversations from across the room, her gift allowing her to feel and influence emotions, making her particularly attuned to Bo's comfort level. She adjusted the mood in the space subtly, easing anxiety when it spiked, calming fear when Bo felt overwhelmed. It was a strange gift and slightly invasive, but Bo appreciated the gentleness with which she used it. Karine spoke with him about medical school and her decades of practicing medicine, about the challenge of working around blood when blood was what she craved. She explained how she'd built her resistance over centuries, how she could now work in an emergency room surrounded by bleeding humans without losing control. It was impressive and terrifying and gave Bo a new appreciation for the discipline required to live the way the Cullens chose to live. Only Royal remained hostile, his disapproval never softening, his interactions with Bo limited to cold civility. Edith explained quietly that Royal resented humanity itself, mourned the human life that had been stolen from him, and saw Bo's willing association with vampires as an insult to everything Royal had lost. He'll come around, Edith said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. Or he won't. Royal's issues are his own. You don't have to win his approval. As evening approached and Bo prepared to leave, Karine pulled him aside for a private conversation. Her expression was serious, her doctor's authority evident in her posture. Bo, I need you to understand something, she said quietly. What we are, what Edith is, it puts you in danger. Not just from us, though that danger is real and constant, but from others of our kind, who might see you and wonder why you know about us. The Volturi particularly. They enforce our laws, and one of those laws is that humans who know about vampires don't stay human for long. They're either transformed or killed. There's no third option. Edith told me, Bo said. I understand the risk. Do you? Corinne asked gently. Do you really understand what you're accepting? Because once the Volturi know about you, and eventually they will know, you'll have to make a choice. Become like us, or die. There won't be any alternative. Bo met her golden eyes steadily. I've already made my choice. I'm staying. The meadow existed in Edith's memory as a place of peace, a clearing deep in the Olympic National Forest where she could go to think, to be alone, to exist without the constant performance of humanity. She'd found it decades ago during one of the family's earliest days in Washington, had returned to it during subsequent visits to the Pacific Northwest, had claimed it as her own private sanctuary. Now she wanted to share it with Bo. The invitation came on a Sunday morning when the forecast promised rare sunshine, one of those brief breaks in Fawkes's perpetual rain that made the sky seem impossibly blue and foreign. Edith appeared at Charlie's house just after dawn, her silver Volvo idling quietly in the driveway, and when Bo came outside, she was leaning against the car with an expression that mixed anticipation and nervousness. I want to show you something, she said without preamble. Something important. Something that will help you understand what I really am. Charlie was fishing with Billy Black, wouldn't be home until evening. Bo left a vague note about hiking with friends and climbed into the Volvo, watching Edith's profile as she drove them out of town and into the forest. She was quiet, focused on the road with more attention than the empty highway required, and Bo understood she was gathering courage for whatever revelation waited in the woods. They parked where the road ended and continued on foot, Edith leading the way along a trail that was barely visible, overgrown with ferns and moss. Bo struggled to keep up, his human clumsiness pronounced against Edith's effortless grace. She slowed for him, matched his pace, offered her cold hand when the terrain became particularly difficult. The meadow appeared gradually, the trees thinning until they opened onto a circular clearing, perhaps 100 yards across. Wildflowers dotted the grass despite the early season, and the sun broke through the clouds in patches, illuminating the space in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Edith stopped at the edge of the trees, still in shadow, and turned to face Bo. Her expression was vulnerable in a way he'd never seen, uncertain and almost frightened. This is what I wanted to show you, she said quietly. What sunlight does to me, to all of us. It's why we can't go out on sunny days, why we have to pretend to be camping or hiking when the weather clears. It's the one thing that immediately reveals what we are. She stepped into the sunlight. The transformation was immediate and shocking. Edith's pale skin began to sparkle as if thousands of tiny diamonds had been embedded in her flesh, light refracting through her at impossible angles, creating rainbow patterns that shifted with every small movement. She looked like she'd been carved from crystal rather than born from anything organic, like something utterly other, completely inhuman. Bo's breath caught, not from horror or revulsion, but from wonder. She was beautiful in a way that transcended normal beauty, in a way that proved she was something more than human, something designed for purposes beyond what mortal flesh could achieve. This is what I am, Edith said, her voice rough with vulnerability. This is the monster underneath the performance. I'm not human, Bo. I never can be again. This is what you're choosing when you choose to be with me. Bo walked forward, crossing from shadow into sunlight, and reached for her glittering hand. Edith flinched slightly at the contact, as if expecting him to recoil, but Bo held on, his warm fingers wrapping around her cold ones. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Incredible. I've never seen anything like this." "You should be afraid," Edith said, but there was relief in her voice, a cautious hope that maybe she wouldn't have to hide this part of herself from him. "You should see the monster." "I see you," Bo corrected. "All of you, including this." They spent hours in the meadow, Igdad demonstrating what she was truly capable of when she didn't have to pretend. She moved with impossible speed, crossing the clearing in the blink of an eye. She lifted a fallen tree with one hand, tossing it aside like it weighed nothing. She climbed the massive fir tree in seconds, ascending with spider-like ease to perch on a branch 100 feet up. She explained the thirst, the constant burning need for blood that never fully went away. Animal blood helped, muted the craving to something manageable, but it was never as satisfying as human blood would be. She was always thirsty, always aware of Bo's pulse, always fighting the instinct to drink from him. "Your blood calls to me more than anyone else's," Edith admitted, sitting beside him in the grass, careful not to sit too close. "You're my singer, la tua cantante, the one whose blood sings specifically to me. It's rare, this particular attraction. Most humans smell appealing to vampires, but you smell like perfection to me. Like everything I've ever wanted concentrated in one fragile body." "And yet you don't drink from me," Bo observed. "Because I love you more than I want to kill you," Edith said quietly. "Though some days, it's a very close contest." She spoke about the Volturi, the ancient vampire royalty who ruled from Volterra, Italy. Aro, Caius, and Marcus, the three leaders who'd existed for 3,000 years, who enforced the few laws that govern vampire kind. The most important law was secrecy. Humans could not know about vampires, and if they did know, they either had to be transformed or killed. There were no exceptions, no alternatives, no mercy. "They'll find out about you eventually," Edith said, her voice heavy with certainty. "Archie's visions aren't always clear about when or how, but they show the Volturi learning about a human who knows our secret. When that happens, Bo, you'll have to choose. Become like me, or die. Those are the only options they'll give you." "Then I'll become like you," Bo said, without hesitation. Edith's expression twisted with pain. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't understand what transformation means. 3 days of burning, of pain beyond anything you can imagine. And then you wake up as something that isn't human anymore. You'll be frozen at 17 forever. You'll never age, never change, never have children, or grow old, or experience any of the things that make human life meaningful. You'll exist for eternity drinking blood and pretending to be something you're not. That's not a gift, Bo. That's damnation." "With you, it wouldn't be," Bo said. "With you, it would be worth it." They argued about it gently, Edith listing all the things Bo would lose, all the reasons he should run from her and never look back. Bo countered with his own certainty that none of those things mattered if it meant losing her. They went in circles, neither convincing the other, both entrenched in their positions. As the afternoon wore toward evening, as the sun began its descent and the shadows lengthened across the meadow, Edith shifted the conversation to something more immediate. The physical limitations of their relationship. How close they could safely be. What kinds of touch were possible and which were too dangerous. "I could kill you by accident," Edith said bluntly. "If I forget my strength for even a moment. If I hold you too tightly or move too quickly, I could break you without meaning to. And if we were ever intimate, in the way human couples are, I don't know if I could maintain control. The closeness, your scent, the heat of your blood so close to the surface, it would be incredibly dangerous." Bo felt heat rise in his face, embarrassed and frustrated in equal measure. "So we can never." "I don't know," Edith admitted. "Maybe someday if I'm very careful. But not now. Not while you're still human and fragile, and I'm still struggling with my thirst for you. It wouldn't be safe." The honesty hurt, but Bo appreciated it more than false promises would have meant. This was the reality of loving a vampire, of choosing to be with someone who could kill him with a careless embrace. There would be limitations, boundaries, constant vigilance. Nothing about this would be easy. But sitting in the meadow with Edith sparkling beside him, her cold hand carefully holding his warm one, Bo couldn't imagine choosing anything else. This impossible love was worth every danger, every limitation, every complication. As they prepared to leave, as the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, and Edith's skin returned to its normal pale perfection, Bo made her a promise. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "I'm not running away or changing my mind or deciding this is too hard. I'm choosing you, Edith. I'm choosing this. Whatever comes next, whatever dangers we have, to face, I want to face them with you." Edith pulled him close, her marble arms wrapping around him with careful restraint, her face pressed against his hair. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish," she murmured. "I haven't decided which." "Can't I be both?" Bo asked. "You definitely are," Edith said. And despite everything, despite the impossibility and the danger and the uncertain future, she laughed. The sound was beautiful and rare and full of a joy that Bo was determined to protect, to preserve, to keep alive despite all the darkness that surrounded them. If loving Edith meant accepting the danger, then he would accept it. If being with her meant eventually becoming like her, then he would embrace that transformation when it came. Because some things were worth any price. Some loves were worth risking everything. And Edith Cullen, sparkling in the sunlight like a creature made of diamond and starlight, was worth more than Bo's safe, normal, human life could ever be. The storm rolled in from the Pacific on a Saturday afternoon in late April. Dark clouds massing over the Olympic Peninsula with the promise of spectacular violence. Archie had been tracking it for days, his visions showing him the perfect conditions for something the Cullen family hadn't been able to do in months. Thunder, lightning, the kind of atmospheric chaos that would mask sounds no human should be able to make. It was time to play baseball. Editha called Bo that morning, her voice bright with an excitement he rarely heard. "We're playing tonight. The storm is going to be perfect. I want you to come watch. I want you to see us when we're not holding back." Bo agreed immediately, curious about what vampire baseball might look like, eager to see another piece of Editha's real life. Charlie was working a double shift at the police station, wouldn't be home until late. Bo left a note about studying at a friend's house and waited for Edith to pick him up. They drove deep into the forest, following roads that became increasingly rough, until even the Volvo struggled with the terrain. Eventually, they parked and continued on foot, Edith leading the way to a massive clearing that must have been several acres across. The rest of the Cullen family was already there, dressed casually in jeans and t-shirts, their usual formal elegance abandoned in favor of comfort and mobility. Thunder rumbled overhead, still distant but approaching steadily. Lightning flickered at the horizon. The air felt charged, electric, alive with the promise of the coming storm. Karine explained the rules, while the others warmed up with tosses that sent the ball rocketing across the clearing at impossible speeds. Baseball, she said, but adapted for vampire abilities. They needed the thunder to mask the sound of the bat hitting the ball, needed the space to accommodate how far vampires could hit and how fast they could run. It was the one sport they could truly play, without restraint, the one activity where they could be completely themselves. Archie was pitching, his small frame coiled with barely contained energy. Eleanor was catching, her powerful build perfect for handling the force of Archie's throws. Edith, Jessamine and Royal would field, while Karine and Ernest batted first. "Stay here," Edith said, positioning Bo at the edge of the tree line, far from where the game would unfold. "Don't move from this spot. We'll be moving fast, and I need to know exactly where you are at all times." Bo nodded, settling against a fallen log, content to watch from a safe distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, soaking into the grass and turning the clearing slick. Then the game began, and Bo understood immediately why they needed the thunder. Archie threw the ball with inhuman speed, the projectile nearly invisible in its flight. Karine swung and connected, and the crack of bat-meeting ball was like an explosion, a sound that echoed across the clearing loud enough to rival the approaching thunder. The ball rocketed into the sky, disappearing into the storm clouds, and Editha and Jessamine were already running, covering impossible distances in seconds, positioning themselves for the catch. Edith leaped, her body soaring 20 feet into the air with effortless grace, and snatched the ball from its descent. She landed in a crouch, her movements fluid and precise, and threw the ball back toward home plate, with enough force to create a whistling sound as it cut through the air. "Out!" Archie called, grinning widely. The game continued, each play more spectacular than the last. Ernest hit the ball so hard it disappeared completely, forcing Edith and Royal to chase it into the forest at speeds Bo couldn't track. Eleanor collided with Jessamine while both reached for the same catch, the impact of their marble bodies meeting sounding like a car crash. They came up laughing, competitive and joyful in ways Bo had never seen them. This was what they were without restraint. This was the power and speed and strength they kept carefully hidden during their daily pretense of humanity. They were magnificent and terrifying and utterly inhuman, and Bo couldn't look away. Edith caught his eye from across the clearing and smiled, a genuine expression of pure happiness that made Bo's heart skip. She was playing with her family, able to be completely herself, and she wanted him to see it, wanted him to witness what she really was without apology or concealment. Then Archie went rigid. Bo saw it from across the clearing, saw the moment Archie's body locked into absolute stillness, his eyes going distant and unfocused in the particular way that meant a powerful vision was overwhelming his present awareness. The game stopped immediately, everyone turning toward Archie with expressions that shifted from joy to concern. Edith was at Beau's side in an instant, moving with speed that blurred the space between them. Her hand found his arm, gripping with careful urgency. "We have to go," she said, her voice tight. "Now." Archie sees visitors. They heard us playing and they're coming to investigate. "Visitors?" Beau asked, but Edith was already pulling him toward the Volvo. "Other vampires," she said shortly. "Nomads, not from a permanent coven. They're curious about finding others of our kind. We have maybe 2 minutes before they arrive." They didn't make it 2 minutes. The family was forming up into a defensive position, creating a loose barrier between Beau and the direction Archie's vision indicated the visitors would arrive. When 3 figures emerged from the forest on the opposite side of the clearing, 2 males and 1 female, all of them beautiful in the way vampires were beautiful, all of them moving with the predatory grace that marked their kind. But unlike the Cullens with their careful, civilized appearance, these 3 looked wild, feral. Their clothing was worn and stained, their hair unkempt, their eyes a vivid crimson that could only mean one thing: they fed on humans. The leader was a dark-skinned male with long dreadlocks, his features aristocratic despite his disheveled appearance. He raised one hand in greeting as they approached, his smile revealing teeth just slightly too white, too perfect. "We heard you playing from quite a distance," he said, his voice carrying a faint French accent. "I am Logan. These are Victor and Joss. We thought we would see if you might welcome some new players." Karine stepped forward, her posture carefully neutral, her voice warm but cautious. "I'm Karine. This is my family. We were just finishing up our game, I'm afraid, but you're welcome to join us another time." Logan's eyes swept across the Cullens with obvious interest, cataloguing details, noting the unusual size of their coven. "A permanent family," he said, and Beau heard the surprise in his thoughts that Edith must be hearing clearly. "That's quite rare. And you've chosen to settle in this area." "We maintain a residence nearby," Karine said carefully. "We find the region suits us well." Beau watched from behind the protective wall of Cullens, trying to stay still, trying not to draw attention, but he could feel the tension radiating from Edith beside him, could see how the entire family had shifted into defensive positions without seeming to move. Then the wind changed. Beau felt it before he understood what it meant, felt the breeze shift direction, carrying his scent across the clearing directly toward the 3 nomads. He saw the moment it hit them, saw all 3 sets of crimson eyes widen, saw nostrils flare as they caught the smell of fresh human blood. The one called Joss dropped into a crouch immediately, his body coiling with predatory intent. His eyes locked on Beau with an intensity that made Beau's heart race with primal fear. Joss was lean and pale, his honey-colored hair falling into eyes that held nothing but hunting instinct. Edith snarled, the sound ripping from her throat like nothing Beau had ever heard from her, pure threat and fury and protective rage. She positioned herself directly between Beau and Joss, her own body dropping into a defensive crouch, every line of her screaming danger to the vampire who dared to target her human. The clearing exploded into motion. Eleanor and Royal moved to flank Edith, creating a wall of marble flesh between Bo and the nomads. Jessamine's military training became evident in how she positioned herself, angling for tactical advantage. Even gentle, earnest features hardened into something dangerous. Joss hadn't moved from his crouch, but his eyes never left Bo. Bo could see the calculation happening behind those crimson eyes, the assessment of odds, the weighing of whether the prize was worth fighting 7 vampires to claim it. Victor had moved beside Joss, her wild red hair cascading down her back, her feline features sharp with interest. She was assessing the Cullens' defensive formation, noting how they'd surrounded the human, understanding that taking this prey would require going through the entire family. Only Logan remained standing, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, though Bo could see the tension in his body, the readiness to flee or fight if necessary. "We didn't realize you were traveling with a human," Logan said carefully, his tone genuinely apologetic. "We meant no offense." "He's with us," Karine said, her voice holding an edge Bo had never heard. "He's under our protection." Bo heard the warning in those words, the message being transmitted. This human was claimed. Attacking him would mean attacking the entire Cullen Coven. And while 3 nomads might pose a threat, 7 vampires who'd worked together for decades were not prey to be taken lightly. But Joss wasn't thinking about odds or strategy or consequences. Edith could hear his thoughts clearly, could feel the hunting, obsession taking root. Joss was a tracker, someone who hunted for sport rather than just sustenance, and Bo represented the most interesting challenge he'd encountered in years. A human protected by 7 vampires, claimed by one in particular with obvious devotion. The difficulty made it irresistible. "You brought a snack," Joss said, his voice holding a tone that made Edith's snarl deepen. How thoughtful. "He's not food," Edith said, her voice barely recognizable. "Back away, now." For a long moment, nobody moved. The 2 groups faced each other across the rain-soaked clearing, vampires against vampires, the tension so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Thunder rolled overhead, and lightning illuminated the tableau in stark white flashes. Then Victor touched Joss's arm, a gentle gesture that carried clear meaning. She was signaling him to back down, to wait, to not start a fight they might not win. Joss had a tendency to become obsessed with challenging hunts, and Victor could already see this situation spiraling in that direction. Better to retreat now, to regroup, to plan rather than attack impulsively. Logan stepped forward deliberately, positioning himself between Joss and the Cullens. "We truly meant no offense," he said, his diplomatic mask firmly in place. "Perhaps we could meet again under better circumstances. We'll be in the area for a while, and it would be good to know more about the region." "Of course," Karine said, though Bo heard the reservations in her voice. "You're welcome to visit our home. We can discuss boundaries and hunting territories." "That would be most helpful," Logan said. He glanced back at Joss and Victor, his expression carrying clear warning. "Come, let's leave our new friends to their evening." For another long moment, Joss didn't move, still locked in that frozen crouch, still staring at Bo with terrible focus. Then slowly, reluctantly, he straightened. But the smile that crossed his face held promise and anticipation and the joy of a hunter who just found his next challenge. "Until we meet again," Joss said, and though he was speaking to Karine, Bo knew the words were meant for him. Then the three nomads were gone, disappearing into the forest with inhuman speed, swallowed by the darkness and rain as if they'd never been there at all. But their presence lingered, the threat of them hanging in the air. Edith stood frozen for several seconds after they left, her body still coiled with protective fury, her mind clearly tracking their thoughts as they moved away through the forest. When she finally turned to Bo, her expression was anguished. "We have to get you away from here, now. Joss is a tracker. He's already obsessed with you, already planning how to get past our defenses. We need to move you somewhere safe before he comes back." The family moved with urgent efficiency, abandoning the baseball game, heading toward their vehicles. Bo followed in a daze, his mind trying to process what had just happened. How quickly joy had turned to danger. How close he'd come to something terrible. As Edith drove him away from the clearing, her hands tight on the steering wheel, Bo understood with terrible clarity that everything had just changed. The danger had always been theoretical before, something they discussed but never truly faced. Now it was real and immediate and hunting him with single-minded determination. And Bo had no idea if any of them would survive what came next. The plan had seemed sound when Corinne outlined it in the living room of the Cullen house. Archie and Jessamine would take Bo to Phoenix, get him away from Forks and the tracker who'd locked onto his scent. Edith, Royal, and Ernest would create a false trail leading north toward Canada, making Joss believe they were fleeing with Bo in that direction. Meanwhile, Corinne and Eleanor would stay in Forks, maintain the appearance of normalcy, make it seem like the family wasn't reacting to any threat. It relied on deception, on Joss following the obvious trail while missing the real one. It relied on the tracker being good but not perfect, skilled but not infallible. It relied on luck and timing and a dozen variables they couldn't fully control. It failed within 48 hours. Bo spent 2 days in a Phoenix hotel room with Archie and Jessamine, watching his guardians grow increasingly tense as Archie's visions shifted and changed. Joss was too smart, too experienced, too dedicated to the hunt. He'd examined the trails carefully, had recognized the deception, had abandoned the northern route, and begun working his way through other possibilities. And somehow, impossibly, he'd figured out where Bo had actually gone. "He's coming to Phoenix," Archie said on the third morning, his face pale with the certainty of his vision. "I can see it clearly now. He's already here, already in the city. He's close." Edith was still days away, still too far north to reach them quickly. The plan required coordination, required everyone in position, required time they suddenly didn't have. Bo felt the fear settling into his bones, cold and heavy. The understanding that he was prey and the hunter was closing in. They moved to a different hotel, tried to stay unpredictable, but Bo could see the strain on Archie and Jessamine. They were struggling with being in close quarters with him, with his scent constantly present, with a thirst that never fully disappeared. Protecting him meant fighting themselves constantly, and the effort was wearing them down. Then Bo's phone rang. The number was his mother's. Bo answered automatically, relief flooding through him at the familiar contact, the connection to his normal human life that felt increasingly distant. "Bo." The voice was Renee's, panicked and frightened. "Bo, please, you have to help me. I don't know what's happening. There's someone here, someone who says he knows you. He says I need to call you. Says you need to come alone or he'll hurt me. Bo, I'm scared. Where are you? The fear in her voice was visceral and real, and Bo felt his heart stop. Joss had his mother, had somehow found Renee, and was using her as bait, as leverage, as the one thing that would make Bo abandon safety and walk directly into the trap. Mom, where are you? Bo asked, his voice shaking. Are you okay? Has he hurt you? I'm at your old dance studio, Renee said, and Bo's blood ran cold. The one on Cactus and 58th. He says you need to come alone. Says if you bring the Cullens, he'll know and I'll die. Please, Bo, please come help me. The line went dead. Bo stared at his phone, his mind racing. Archie and Jessamine were in the other room, discussing strategy, trying to coordinate with Edith, who was still hours away. They would never let him go alone, would insist on coming with him, on protecting him, on confronting Joss together. But Joss had his mother, had Renee, who'd done nothing wrong, who didn't even know vampires existed, who was in danger because of Bo's choices. He couldn't risk her life, couldn't let Joss hurt her because Bo had chosen to love a vampire. The decision made itself. Bo slipped out of the hotel room while Archie and Jessamine were distracted, left a note saying he'd gone to get food, and caught a taxi to the address burned into his memory. The dance studio where he'd taken lessons as a child, where his mother had enrolled him thinking he needed more coordination, where he'd spent awkward months trying to learn movements his body refused to execute properly. It was familiar and strange at once. This building he hadn't seen in years. The taxi dropped him at the entrance and drove away, leaving Bo alone in the parking lot of a strip mall that had seen better days. The dance studio occupied the end unit, its windows papered over, its door slightly ajar. Bo pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was exactly as he remembered. Mirrors lining one wall, now dusty and cracked. Wooden floors scuffed from years of dancing feet. A sound system in the corner that probably hadn't worked in a decade. And in the center of the room, a video camera on a tripod, its red recording light glowing steadily. Hello, Bo, Joss said, stepping out from behind the camera. I'm so glad you could make it. And alone, too. How wonderfully cooperative of you. Bo's eyes swept the studio frantically, looking for his mother, seeing no one but the vampire who'd been hunting him for days. Where's my mum? You said she was here. You said you had her. Joss laughed, the sound genuine and delighted. I lied. Well, not entirely. I do have footage of your mother, borrowed from your own home videos. Very touching stuff. But she's not here, Bo. She was never in danger. Just you. Always just you. The truth hit Bo like a physical blow. There had been no threat to Renee. The phone call had been a recording, manipulated audio, pulled from videos Joss had somehow accessed. His mother was safe in Florida with Phil, completely unaware that her son had just walked into a trap to save her from a danger that didn't exist. Bo had sacrificed himself for nothing. The camera is recording, Joss continued conversationally, gesturing toward the tripod. I want to document this. Want Eddie to be able to watch exactly what happened, to see every moment of your death. It seems only fair, don't you think? She took something from me by protecting you so well. This way she'll always have the memory of what her protection ultimately cost. Bo backed toward the door, but Joss moved faster, crossing the space between them in a blur of motion, his hand slamming into Beau's chest hard enough to send him flying backward. Beau hit the mirrors with enough force to shatter them, glass raining down around him, pain exploding through his body. He tried to stand, but his leg wouldn't support his weight. Something was broken, maybe multiple things, and blood was flowing from cuts where the glass had sliced his skin. The scent filled the studio, sweet and coppery, and Joss's eyes darkened to black as the smell hit him. "You smell even better up close," Joss said, stalking toward where Beau lay among broken mirrors. "Edith must have incredible control to resist you. I certainly don't plan to try." The attack was methodical and cruel. Joss wasn't feeding yet, wasn't trying to kill quickly. He was playing, testing, seeing how much damage a human body could sustain. He broke Beau's other leg with a casual kick, cracked ribs with measured pressure, opened cuts that bled freely, filling the air with more of the scent that made Joss's predatory instincts sing. Beau tried to fight back, tried to crawl away, tried to do anything but lie there taking the abuse. But he was human and fragile and completely outmatched. Every movement brought fresh pain. Every breath felt like knives in his chest. And he could feel consciousness starting to slip as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his system. Then Joss grabbed Beau's wrist, his marble fingers wrapping around the fragile joint, and he bit down. The pain was immediate and all-consuming. Venom flooded into Beau's bloodstream, burning like acid, and he screamed with what little breath remained in his damaged lungs. This was different from the physical injuries, different from broken bones and lacerated flesh. This was fire spreading through his veins, poison rewriting his biology at the cellular level, transformation beginning whether he wanted it or not. Joss pulled back, his lips stained with Beau's blood, his expression satisfied. "There," he said softly. "Now you'll either die or become one of us. Either way, Edith loses you. Either way, I win." He was moving toward Beau again, clearly planning to inflict more damage, when the door exploded inward. Edith moved with a fury Beau had never witnessed, her face twisted with rage beyond anything human. She hit Joss with enough force to send both of them crashing through the opposite wall into the adjacent unit. The sounds of their combat were terrible, marble bodies colliding with impacts that sounded like cars crashing, growls and snarls that belonged to animals rather than anything that had ever been human. Through the haze of pain and encroaching unconsciousness, Beau saw the rest of the Cullens arrive. Archie and Jessamine, their faces stricken with guilt at having failed to protect him. Royal and Eleanor, moving to help Edith destroy the tracker. Ernest, kneeling beside Beau, his gentle hands assessing the damage with a doctor's precision. Then Corinne was there, her medical training evident in how quickly she triaged his injuries. Broken legs, broken ribs, severe lacerations, massive blood loss. Any one of those things would require hospitalization. All of them together suggested trauma that might not be survivable. But none of that mattered compared to the venom. "His wrist," Corinne said sharply, examining where Joss had bitten. "He's been envenomated. The transformation has started." Edith appeared beside them, her clothing torn, her face spattered with venom from Joss's destroyed body. She looked at Beau's wrist, at the darkening veins spreading from the bite, and her expression transformed into absolute anguish. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, this can't be happening." "We have to get the venom out," Corinne said. her voice taking on the authority of her medical expertise. If we can extract it before it reaches his heart, before it spreads too far, we might be able to stop the transformation. How? Edith demanded. The same way it went in, Karine said quietly. Someone has to suck it out. Someone with enough control to taste his blood and stop before draining him completely. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. What Karine was asking was nearly impossible. To put mouth to a bleeding human, to taste the blood that called to vampire instincts, and to stop before those instincts took over completely. It required control beyond what most vampires possessed. "I'll do it," Edith said immediately. "Edith, you can't," Karine said. "He's your singer. His blood calls to you more strongly than anyone. If you start drinking, you might not be able to stop." "Then I'll stop anyway," Edith said fiercely. "I'm not letting him transform like this. Not from violence and trauma and a tracker's cruelty. If he's going to become one of us, it should be his choice, not Joss's." She didn't wait for permission. She lifted Beau's wrist to her mouth and began to extract the venom, her face a mask of concentration and desperate control. Beau felt the pull of it, felt her drawing the poison back out of his system, and he also felt the fire starting to fade, the burning that had begun to spread through his veins retreating. But it wasn't retreating fast enough. Karine watched with growing concern, her enhanced senses tracking the venom's progress through Beau's cardiovascular system. It had already reached major arteries, was spreading toward his heart with each beat of his struggling pulse. Even with Edith extracting it as quickly as possible, they were running out of time. "It's too far," Karine said quietly. "It's already past the point where we can remove it all. Edith, stop. You've done what you can." But Edith kept going, kept trying, kept fighting to save Beau from the transformation she knew he wasn't ready for. Her control was slipping. Beau could see it in her eyes, could see the struggle between love and thirst playing out in real time. "Edith, stop," Karine said more firmly. "His blood is clean enough. You have to stop now before you lose control." Edith pulled away finally, her mouth stained with Beau's blood, her entire body trembling with the effort of stopping. She looked at Karine with desperate hope. "Did I get enough? Will he be okay?" Karine's expression answered before her words did. "You removed most of it. Enough that the transformation will be slower, less agonizing than it would have been, but not enough to stop it completely. I'm sorry, Edith. He's going to change." The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. Beau Swan was going to become a vampire. Not because he'd chosen it, not because he'd asked for it, not because he was ready, but because a tracker had bitten him and the venom had spread too far to be fully extracted. Life had become death, and death was about to become immortal life. The fire began in Beau's wrist, where Joss had bitten. A burning that felt like molten metal had been injected directly into his veins. For the first few minutes, it was manageable, almost bearable compared to the pain of his broken bones and lacerated flesh. Beau thought maybe this was something he could endure, something he could survive through willpower and determination. He was wrong. The venom spread through his cardiovascular system with methodical efficiency, following the pathways of arteries and veins, reaching every extremity, every organ, every cell. And as it spread, the fire grew. What had started as intense pain became agony. What had been agony became torture beyond anything Beau's mind could process or contextualize. He thought he understood pain. The broken legs had hurt. The shattered ribs had been excruciating. But those injuries were localized, finite, comprehensible. This was different. This was every nerve ending in his body simultaneously screaming, every cell being systematically destroyed and rebuilt, every piece of his human biology being rewritten into something other. Karine had moved him before the transformation truly took hold, had gotten him to a hospital where his physical injuries could be explained and treated. Broken bones from a fall downstairs, the story went. Severe trauma from an accident. The doctors accepted it without much question, too focused on stabilizing him to wonder about inconsistencies in the narrative. They set his legs in casts, wrapped his ribs, stitched his lacerations. They gave him morphine for the pain, pumped him full of drugs that should have provided relief, should have dulled the agony to something manageable. But the morphine did nothing against the venom's fire. Human painkillers couldn't touch what was happening to him at the cellular level. Bo wanted to scream, but his throat wouldn't cooperate. The muscles locked rigid by the transformation. He wanted to thrash, to move, to do anything to escape the burning, but his body had frozen into absolute stillness. All he could do was lie there and burn, conscious and aware of every second of agony with no respite, no relief, no end in sight. The Cullens maintained a constant vigil. Edith never left his side, her cold hand holding his burning one, her face twisted with guilt and anguish at what was happening to him. She blamed herself for this. Bo understood through the haze of pain, blamed herself for not protecting him better, for not stopping Joss before he could bite, for not extracting enough venom to prevent the transformation. Karine came and went, checking his vital signs with a doctor's precision, monitoring the transformation's progress. She explained to the human medical staff that Bo was her patient, that she was overseeing his care personally, and her authority as a respected physician kept them from interfering too much. The others rotated through. Archie sat with him during the long night hours, talking quietly about futures he could see forming, about the life Bo would have once this was over. Jessamine used her gift to ease what emotional suffering she could, though even her abilities couldn't fully touch the physical agony of transformation. Royal stood silent guard by the door, his disapproval of the situation evident, but his loyalty to family stronger. Eleanor brought a fierce protectiveness, as if she could intimidate the pain into leaving if she just looked threatening enough. Ernest's gentle presence was a comfort, his quiet voice reading aloud from books Bo couldn't focus on, but appreciated anyway. And through it all, the fire burned. Bo lost track of time. Minutes and hours and days blurred into one continuous experience of agony. He existed in a space beyond normal consciousness, aware but not fully present, his mind fracturing under the strain of processing pain that shouldn't be survivable. Memories flickered through his awareness like film clips played at random. His mother's face, Charlie's awkward affection, the phoenix sun he'd never feel warm against his skin again. The rain in Forks that he'd complained about, but had started to find soothing. Edith's golden eyes meeting his across the biology classroom that first day. He remembered being human, remembered what it felt like to be warm, to have a heartbeat that felt normal rather than frantic, to breathe because his body needed oxygen rather than out of habit. He catalogued all the things he was losing with each passing hour, all the experiences he'd never have now, all the futures that were being burned away along with his humanity. He would never go to college, never have children, never grow old with grey hair and wrinkled skin, and all the physical markers of a life fully lived. He would be 17 forever, frozen at this age, this moment, this version of himself that still felt unfinished and uncertain. The loss should have devastated him, should have made him rage against what was happening, should have made him wish for death instead of this transformation. But somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the fear and the grief for his human life, Bo found something else. Acceptance. Maybe even something like peace. Because this meant eternity with Edith. This meant joining her family, becoming truly part of the world she inhabited. This meant no more fragility, no more constant danger of accidentally dying from her strength or another vampire's hunger. He would be her equal, her partner, her mate in the way vampire relationships worked. If he survived this, if the transformation completed successfully instead of destroying him, if he woke at the end of this burning with his mind intact and his soul still his own. The fire had a pattern, Bo realized, as the hours stretched toward days. It started in his extremities and worked inward, the venom systematically rewriting his biology from the outside in. His fingers and toes burned first, then his hands and feet, then his arms and legs. It crawled up his spine and spread through his torso, reaching his organs one by one, transforming each into something that no longer needed to function the way human organs did. His heart was the epicenter, the last holdout, still beating frantically as the venom worked its way through his cardiovascular system. Bo could feel each beat like a hammer against his ribs, could feel his heart struggling to pump venom-saturated blood through vessels that were being fundamentally altered. And then finally, the venom reached his brain. That was when the pain transcended everything that had come before. His brain was being rewritten, neurons being restructured, synapses being fundamentally altered. Bo felt his thoughts fragmenting, felt his sense of self coming apart, felt the very architecture of his consciousness being torn down and rebuilt into something new. He was dying. Not his body, which was being preserved and enhanced, but his human self. Bo Swan, the 17-year-old boy from Phoenix, was burning away, and what would emerge from the ashes would be something both him and not him. Familiar and alien, human and monster. The transformation had a rhythm, a progression that Corrine had explained before it fully took hold. 3 days, she'd said, 3 days of burning, and then the change would be complete. Bo tried to track the time, tried to count the hours, but everything blurred together in the endless agony, until suddenly, impossibly, the fire began to recede. It happened gradually at first, so subtly that Bo thought he might be imagining it. The burning in his fingers seemed fractionally less intense. His toes hurt slightly less than they had moments before. The change was so small as to be almost unnoticeable, but it was real. The venom was finishing its work, completing the transformation, and the pain was finally mercifully beginning to fade. The relief was so profound that Bo wanted to weep, but his eyes wouldn't produce tears. The fire retreated like a tide going out, pulling back from his extremities toward his core, concentrating in his chest, where his heart still hammered away with desperate determination. And then his heart began to slow. Bo felt each beat with perfect clarity, felt the rhythm changing, the frantic pace easing, the desperate hammering becoming something calmer, steadier, slower. His heart was giving up its human rhythm, preparing for the stillness that would define his existence from this point forward. One beat, then a pause, then another beat, weaker than the last. Another pause, longer this time. Another beat, barely perceptible, and then nothing. Absolute stillness in his chest where life had always resided. Silence where there should have been the steady thump of living muscle. Beau Swan's heart stopped, and with it, his human life ended. But death wasn't the end. It was only a transition, a threshold crossed into something else entirely. The silence after his heart stopped was profound and strange. Beau lay absolutely still, no breath moving his chest, no pulse animating his body, and he waited for something to happen, for consciousness to end, for the afterlife to begin, for whatever came next in the progression from living to dead. What came instead was sensation. His eyes opened, and the world exploded into clarity beyond anything human vision could achieve. He could see individual dust particles floating in the air, could count the threads in the hospital curtains, could read the serial number on the IV stand across the room. Every detail stood in perfect focus simultaneously, no blur, no peripheral vagueness, just complete absolute awareness of everything in his field of vision. Sound was the same. He could hear conversations happening floors below, could distinguish individual heartbeats of nurses and patients throughout the building, could track footsteps in the parking lot outside. The cacophony should have been overwhelming, but somehow his mind processed it all effortlessly, categorizing and prioritizing without conscious effort. And scent. Oh, the scents were incredible and terrible in equal measure. He could smell everything. The antiseptic hospital cleaners, the flowers someone had brought to a patient down the hall, the food being prepared in the cafeteria, the fierce sweat of a worried family member in the waiting room, and blood. He could smell blood everywhere, the living blood of humans moving through the hospital, and the scent called to something primal and demanding in his newly transformed body. Thirst announced itself with brutal urgency. Beau's throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper, burning with a need that made the transformation's pain seem almost gentle by comparison. He wanted blood, needed blood. The craving was all-consuming and absolute, and for a terrible moment, Beau understood how easy it would be to give in, to hunt, to feed. Then Edith's face appeared above him, her features coming into perfect focus, and the thirst receded slightly under the shock of seeing her clearly for the first time with vampire eyes. She was more beautiful than he'd ever realized. Every feature was perfect, flawless. Her marble skin smooth as glass, her golden eyes bright with relief and joy, and something that might have been tears if vampires could cry. She was looking at him like he was the most precious thing in the world, and Beau felt something in his silent chest constrict with love so intense it was almost painful. "Beau," Edith whispered, her voice like music, like something impossibly beautiful. "You're awake. You're okay. How do you feel?" How did he feel? Beau tried to catalogue the sensations, tried to put into words what it was like to exist in this new body that was his but also utterly foreign. Strong. He felt incredibly strong, like he could tear through the hospital bed with his bare hands. Fast. He could sense the potential for speed in his muscles, the ability to move in ways human bodies never could. Aware Every sense was heightened to the point of absurdity, giving him information about the world that no human could ever access. And thirsty, desperately, agonizingly thirsty. "I need to hunt," Bo said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, more resonant, more beautiful than his human voice had ever been. "The thirst is really bad." "I know," Edith said gently. "That's normal for a newborn. The thirst is always worst in the beginning. But we need to get you out of the hospital first. Get you somewhere away from humans before we let you hunt." Karine appeared beside the bed, her face showing relief and professional assessment in equal measure. "Let me do a quick examination," she said, her doctor's training evident even now. "I want to make sure the transformation completed properly, that there are no complications." She checked him with efficient thoroughness, examining his eyes, his skin, testing his reflexes and range of motion. Bo submitted to it with patience he didn't feel, hyper-aware of the humans in the building around them, of the blood pumping through their veins, of how easy it would be to solve his thirst if he just stopped fighting the urge. "Everything looks perfect," Karine said finally. "The transformation completed without any issues. You're a vampire now, Bo. Congratulations and welcome to immortality." The word felt heavy with meaning. Immortal. He would exist for centuries, maybe millennia, watching the world change around him while he remained frozen at 17. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like possibility, like potential, like a future that stretched forward into infinity. Getting out of the hospital required careful planning. They couldn't just walk out. Too many questions would be asked about the miraculous recovery of a patient who'd been critically injured days before. Instead, Karine used her authority to have Bo transferred to a private facility. Papers were forged, records were adjusted, and the human bureaucracy accepted the story without much resistance. By nightfall, Bo was in the forest outside Phoenix with Edith and her family, finally able to address the burning thirst that had been building since he woke. The hunt was instinctual in ways that both thrilled and disturbed him. His body knew what to do without conscious thought, knew how to track the deer by scent, how to move silently through the underbrush, how to strike with killing efficiency. The blood helped, dulled the thirst to something manageable rather than all-consuming. It wasn't satisfying the way human blood would be, Bo understood instinctively, but it was enough. It would have to be enough, because the alternative was becoming a killer, and Bo refused to let his transformation turn him into a monster. They returned to Forks within the week, Bo learning to navigate his new existence under the careful guidance of Edith and her family. He learned to move at human speeds when necessary, to remember to breathe even though he didn't need air, to blink and fidget and perform all the small unconscious actions that marked living beings. He learned to hunt properly, to take only what he needed, to leave prey alive when possible. He learned to control the thirst, to push past the burning in his throat, to choose restraint over instinct. He learned to exist as a vampire who wanted to hold on to his humanity despite no longer being human. And he learned something unexpected, something that surprised everyone, including himself. Editha still couldn't read his mind. She'd been certain that transformation would remove whatever shield had protected Bo's thoughts during his human life. Most mental gifts didn't survive the change, were either lost entirely or transformed into something new. But when Edith focused on Beau's mind, trying to hear his thoughts the way she heard everyone else's, she found the same frustrating silence that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "It's evolved," Archie said, examining Beau with his gift, watching futures shift and change. "Your shield protected you as a human, but now it's stronger, more deliberate. You're not just blocking mental intrusion passively anymore. You're actively protecting yourself, even if you're not conscious of doing it." Beau concentrated, trying to feel this shield Archie described, trying to understand how to control it, and slowly, gradually, he became aware of something. A barrier around his mind, flexible and strong, keeping his thoughts private even from the vampire he loved most. He tried to lower it, to let Edith in, but the shield resisted his efforts. Whatever this ability was, it operated on instinct rather than conscious control, protecting him whether he wanted protection or not. "I'm sorry," Beau said to Edith, frustrated by his inability to share his thoughts. "I don't know how to turn it off." But Edith was smiling, a genuine expression of delight and wonder. "Don't be sorry. This is incredible. You have a gift, Beau, a real gift, not just enhanced senses or physical abilities. Your mind is protected in ways that could be invaluable if we ever have to face the Volturi. They can't read you, can't manipulate you, can't use their mental gifts against you. You're safe in ways most vampires never are." The realization settled over Beau with strange comfort. He was different even among vampires, special in ways that had nothing to do with strength or speed, and everything to do with the privacy of his own consciousness. It felt right somehow, this gift that let him keep himself even in a world where minds were open books to those with the ability to read them. The weeks that followed were an adjustment, a learning curve that sometimes felt impossible and other times felt natural as breathing. Beau attended school with the Cullens, playing the role of adopted family member, pretending to be human while being anything but. He sat through classes he'd already completed, listened to teachers explain concepts he now understood with perfect clarity, and maintained a careful performance of normalcy. He hunted regularly, sometimes with Edith, sometimes with the others, learning from their decades or centuries of experience. He practiced his control around humans, building resistance to their scent, proving he could exist in close proximity without becoming a danger. And he adjusted to immortality, to the understanding that his life had fundamentally changed in ways both beautiful and terrible. He would never see his mother again, not really, would never be able to have a normal relationship with Charlie, who thought his son had moved away to attend a private school in Alaska. Those relationships were casualties of his transformation, losses he mourned even as he accepted their necessity. But he had Edith, had her family who'd become his family, had an eternity stretching forward into unknown futures, full of possibilities he'd never imagined during his brief human life. He died in that ballet studio, his human existence ending in blood and venom and transformation he hadn't chosen. But he'd also been reborn, had become something new, something powerful, something that could stand beside Edith as her equal, rather than her fragile human burden. The life he'd lost was gone forever, mourned and released into memory. The life he'd gained was just beginning. Life and death. The title promised both, and Beau Swan experienced them in ways he never anticipated when he first arrived in Forks on that grey January morning. He'd lived 17 years as a human, ordinary and unremarkable, defined by clumsiness and quiet self-sacrifice. And then he died in a ballet studio in Phoenix, his human heart stopping as venom rewrote everything he was into, something fundamentally other. The transformation wasn't what Bella's story promised. There was no romantic proposal, no carefully planned ceremony, no moment of conscious choice made with full understanding of consequences. Beau's mortality ended with violence and necessity, with a tracker's cruel game and venom that spread too far to be fully extracted. He became a vampire not because he asked for it, but because the alternative was death, and Edith couldn't bear to lose him. The gender swap revealed something profound about agency and choice. Bella's story allowed her years to consider transformation, to weigh humanity against immortality, to make an informed decision about her future. Beau got 3 days of burning agony and woke to a life he'd barely had time to contemplate. The same events, the same basic plot, but the execution felt different. Faster, more violent, less about romance and more about survival. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps Stephen E. Meyer was showing that the same story could have different emotional textures depending on who lived it. That changing gender changed not the events themselves, but how they felt, how they resonated, what they meant. Beau's transformation was theft in ways that Bella's eventual choice wouldn't be. His humanity was taken by violence rather than offered through love. And yet, in the aftermath, in the weeks and months of learning to be vampire, Beau found something Bella had sought all along. Eternity with the one he loved. Equality with Edith. No longer fragile prey, but immortal partner. Belonging in the Cullen. Family, accepted and protected and valued. The gift came wrapped in trauma, but it was still a gift. Still something precious, even if the method of receiving it was terrible. The shield remained, that curious protection that kept Beau's thoughts private, even from those who could read every other mind. It evolved with his transformation, became stronger, more deliberate, a gift that marked him as special even among vampires. Edith still couldn't hear his thoughts, still had to rely on his words and his face and his actions to understand what moved through his silent mind. The mystery that had drawn her to him remained, proof that some things survived transformation intact. Beau learned what it meant to be vegetarian vampire, to find nature every moment of existence, to choose restraint over instinct. The thirst never fully disappeared, just became manageable, controllable, something he could live with rather than something that controlled him. He hunted in forests with Edith and her family, taking animal blood, leaving prey alive when possible, holding onto humanity even while being fundamentally inhuman. He couldn't see his mother again, couldn't maintain normal relationship with Charlie. Those connections were casualties of transformation, relationships that required distance and eventual staged death to maintain the illusion of normal human life continuing somewhere else. Renee thought her son was attending private school in Alaska, happy and thriving in ways that made her proud. Charlie accepted the story with quiet sadness, missing the son who'd briefly lived with him, but understanding that young people needed to find their own paths. The lies were necessary. The distance was required, but the losses were real, mourned in quiet moments when Beau remembered what it felt like to be human, to be someone's son, to exist in normal world of mortals who aged and changed and eventually died. But he had forever now, had centuries maybe millennia stretching forward into futures he couldn't imagine, had Edith beside him, her cold hand in his, her golden eyes meeting his with love that transcended the boundaries between human and monster, had family who accepted him, protected him, taught him how to exist as vampire who wanted to be good despite being designed for predation. Life became death in that ballet studio. Death became immortal life in the 3 days that followed. And Beau Swan, no longer quite human but not quite monster either, learned to navigate the space between what he'd been and what he'd become. The choice had been made for him by violence and venom and necessity, but the life that resulted, impossible and beautiful and eternally complicated, was his to live however he chose. The mirror had shown its reflection. The gender swap had revealed its truths. And the reimagined story had proven that love and transformation and the boundary between life and death felt different depending on who experienced them, even when the events remained fundamentally the same. So sleep well, dreamers, in this world where life and death are merely transitions rather than endings, where choices are sometimes made for us by forces beyond our control, where transformation comes through trauma as often as through love, where forever is both blessing and curse, gift and theft, salvation and damnation, wrapped together in marble flesh and golden eyes. The story ends differently here than it began in Twilight's pages. Beau's transformation came decades before Bella's would, stolen rather than chosen, violent rather than romantic, but perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the same story told through different eyes should feel different in its ending, should ask different questions about agency and choice and what it means to become something other than human. Rest now, let the rain fall, and dream of worlds where love transcends mortality, where death is only doorway to forever, and where the choice between life and death sometimes isn't choice at all, but necessity, wrapped in venom and burning into eternity. Good night.